Think you know Queen Elizabeth I? How about the ruler whose teeth were black? Rotting stumps, who for years wore a poisonous lead mask that literally ate away at her skin, and for whom a court bishop had a perfectly healthy tooth ripped out of his own head, just to calm her down. This is the story they don't teach you in school, the truth about what the most powerful woman of her age really looked, smelled, and lived like. Her smile was a rotting nightmare, so ready to get down and dirty. That intro was just a warm-up. Now we get to the details. The kind of stuff your teachers tried to shield you from. Let's start with a symbol of power, something that was meant to dazzle and inspire all. The royal smile. Picture the Queen, Elizabeth I, powerful, imperious, indomitable. Now, picture her smiling, and your gut instinct is to recoil. Why? Because Her Majesty had a sweet tooth. A raging, all-consuming sweet tooth. Sugar back then was the ultimate status symbol, a luxury only the obscenely wealthy could afford, and Elizabeth consumed it by the ton. And here's a detail historians shamefully hide in the footnotes: she brushed her teeth. Oh yes, except her toothpaste was sugar-based, honey, powdered sugar, and various flavorings. She was literally rubbing decay right into her gums. The result, an absolute and mitigated dental disaster. Her teeth began to blacken, crumble, and rot right in her mouth. We're not talking a little yellowing of the enamel, oh no. Imagine blackened stumps, rotted down to the root, sticking out of perpetually inflamed, bleeding gums. And the smell. That smell. Ambassadors and courtiers who had the honor of a private audience wrote in their diaries that they'd try to turn sideways just to avoid breathing in the stench. A mix of rot, stale infection, and cloying sweetness. A cocktail you might call royal nightmare. Then one day, one of these rotten husks started to ache so badly the Queen was climbing the walls, day and night. Pus, swelling, a hellish, throbbing pain. Her physicians begged her to have the tooth removed, but she was the goddamn Queen. And she was terrified of the pain, panic-stricken. She was convinced the procedure would be unbearable torture. And so one of her courtiers, Bishop John Aylmer, to show her it wasn't so bad, did the unthinkable. This is the part where your high school history teacher would have awkwardly skipped a page. In front of the entire court, he called over the royal surgeon and ordered him to pull a perfectly healthy tooth from his own mouth, just to prove to his queen that it was survivable. Imagine the scene. The crunch of bone, a strangled cry of blood, and there this poor bastard stands, offering a gap-toothed grin, proving he's still alive. How's that for motivating the staff? Hold on. Let's just breathe for a second. What was that? Fanatical devotion? Or just the primal terror of a monarch whose bad mood over a toothache could cost you your head? Official history likes to keep quiet about this, calling it an act of valor. But you and I know the truth. Behind that valor was the ice-cold hell of court life. But you know the wildest part of this whole story. You think everyone was horrified by her rotten teeth. Polite society doesn't talk about these things, but we're not in polite society, are we? Court ladies, wanting to be on trend and show off their own status and proximity to the Queen, started deliberately blackening their own teeth with coal soot, whatever it took. Also, their smiles could be just as aristocratically rotten, because if the Queen has black teeth, it means you can afford tons of sugar. Her physical flaw became a fashion statement. Her rotting mouth wasn't just a medical problem, it became a twisted symbol of power that everyone aspired to. But there was something else about her body that worried England far more than her bad breath. Was her womb, the empty womb of the Virgin Queen. And if you think the story of her teeth was gruesome, you have no idea the humiliation and outright medical torture she was willing to endure in her desperate, secret battle for an heir. And this, my friends, is where the most horrifying paradox begins, unable to control what was happening inside her body. Elizabeth began to control what everyone saw on the outside with the obsession of a maniac. Her face. It became her master project, her masterpiece, and her curse. Ready, let's do this. Her secret weapon in this war on aging was called Venetian shrews, or as it was poetically known, the spirits of Saturn. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? In reality, it was a volatile concoction of white lead and vinegar, Poison. Pure. Concentrated poison that she slathered on her face every single day. And you know what lead does to skin? It literally eats it away. First, it bleaches, yes, creating that coveted aristocratic pallor. But then it starts to devour the flesh. Polite society doesn't talk about this, but we're not in polite society, are we? The skin beneath this mask was slowly turning into a gray, lifeless wasteland. It was covered in sores, lesions, and the dark spots of lead poisoning. And what did the queen do? That's right, she just layered the lead on thicker, and thicker, and thicker. It was a vicious, hellish cycle. The worse her real face became, the thicker and more impenetrable the mask that hid the horror. Courtiers whispered that by evening, the queen smelled not of perfume, but of the sour tang of vinegar and rotting sores. She was literally plastering over the cracks in her reputation, like a handyman patching the walls of a decaying house. Now that you've pictured that horror, let's pause. Why? Why would she subject herself to this? Well, as a young woman, she'd survived a nasty bout of smallpox. The very disease that left horrific, deep scars on the face. For an ordinary woman, a tragedy. For the Virgin Queen, whose entire image was built on divine purity and flawlessness, it was a death sentence for her brand. Her face had to be a perfect canvas, a symbol of her incorruptible reign. This is the part where your high school history teacher would have awkwardly skipped a page. Her makeup wasn't vanity, it was a political statement. But wait, that's not even the cherry on top. That would be the mercury on her lips, to get those fashionably bright red lips. She used a lipstick made from cinnabar, and cinnabar, just so you know, is mercury sulfide. Every time she licked her lips, she was ingesting a microdose of poison. Now, think about it. Think about Elizabeth's famous fits of rage, her paranoia, her violent mood swings. Official history prefers to keep quiet, chalking it all up to a difficult personality. But what if we weren't looking at a tyrant, but at a victim slowly, daily, poisoning herself with her own vanity? For years, she wore this toxic mask. The skin beneath it grew so thin that, according to contemporary accounts, the queen's face became as fragile as an eggshell. It could literally shatter or crack from too wide a smile or a careless touch. Her face became her prison, forged from lead and mercury. And from that prison, there was only one final escape. But how she met her end, refusing to remove that mask even in the face of death, turning her final days into a one-woman show. That, my friends, is a story about the final, desperate act of defiance from a queen who lost the war not against the Spanish Armada, but against her own reflection. She feared water more than filth, and this, of course, begs the question. What exactly was underneath that mask? What was under those tons of velvet, brocade, and pearls she piled on herself? So, strap in. Because now we're taking a dive into the grime. Literally. Because our celebrated Virgin Queen, the terror of the seas and the symbol of a nation, was afraid of one thing more than Spanish spies and conspirators. She was deathly afraid of water. Yes, you heard that right. There's a famous quote, attributed either to her or her godson, "I take a bath once a month, whether I need it or no." Sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But that, folks, wasn't irony. That was her bragging. That was her showing off, basically saying, "Look how clean I am, once a month." You see, this is something they definitely don't tell you in the textbooks. In their time, water was considered a direct conduit for disease. The thinking was that hot water opened up the pores, and all sorts of plague, cholera, and other nastiness would fly right into you. Water, in their view, didn't wash away dirt, it washed away your natural defenses. Do you see the twisted logic? Filth was your shield. Your stinking, greasy, but protective armor. So how did they, manage? Here's a detail historians shamefully hide in the footnotes. They changed their linen, fine linen undershirts. The belief was that the linen, pressing against the body, would absorb all the dirt, sweat, and grime. You'd just take off one shirt, yellowed and practically crunchy with dried sweat, and put on a fresh one, and voila, you're clean. Now just close your eyes for a second and imagine that smell, the sweet, sour stench of an unwashed body, marinating for weeks under layers of silk. A scent that mingled with the aroma of sweat ground into the expensive fabric of her gown, and all of it desperately masked by gallons of sharp, heavy perfume. She was a walking biological attack in a crown. And on the rare occasion a bath did happen, it was an event. Dozens of servants hauled buckets of water, heated them over fires, and dragged a massive wooden tub into her chambers. It wasn't a hygienic procedure. It was a complex, expensive, and, in their minds, a damn risky medical ritual. And here's where we get to the truly terrifying part. This panic-driven fear of water had a consequence far more horrifying than just a foul odor and lice in her wig. Because by refusing to wash away the filth, she was also refusing to wash away something else. That very same lead mask we were talking about. Every day she chose not to wash was another 24 hours she let that poison fester on her skin, layer by layer, and this poison wasn't just masking her aging skin, it was seeping in, slowly but surely, sinking into her bloodstream, poisoning her from the inside out. And that, my friends, is how a fear of clean water turned a queen's greatest beauty weapon into her personal torture chamber and, ultimately, her murder weapon. Her palaces were gilded cesspools. Yeah, her murder weapon. But you know what's really wild? That poison on her face, that lead mask, it was just the cherry on top. On a very, very rotten and stinking cake. Because that terror of water, the panic that made her slather herself in lead, was just a symptom of a much deeper, stinkier problem. A problem that turned her lavish palaces into gilded cesspools. Alright, strap in. Here we go. When you think of royal palaces, the Louvre, Versailles, Versailles, you picture glittering gold, silks, balls that last till dawn. Now, I want you to add one tiny, but crucial, detail to that picture. Imagine all that splendor swimming in an invisible but all-pervading cloud of rotting shit and piss. Because there was no plumbing, my friends, none, zilch, nada. So, where did the queen herself go to? You know, do her business. You might ask. Surely not in a corner, like the rest of the court. Oh no, she had a royal toilet. And it was, perhaps, one of the most humiliating details of the era. It was a chair. Just a chair with a hole in it, with a pot underneath. But wait, it gets better. This is something they definitely don't teach you in history class. The man in charge of this throne held the official title of Groom of the Stool. And it was one of the most prestigious and coveted positions in the entire court. This man didn't just empty the pot. He was right there with the monarch during their most intimate moments. He'd provide the water and towel for cleansing, and he assisted with the hygiene. Yep, you heard that right. The most influential aristocrat, the envy of all, was, in essence, the royal ass wiper. And right there, just stop for a second. Let the sheer absurdity of that sink in. A man gets power, access to the monarch's inner circle, the chance to whisper state secrets in his ear, in exchange for dealing with his shit. Literally, polite society doesn't talk about this, but we're not in polite society, are we? This is the real and varnished underbelly of power. Now, back to the hundreds of other courtiers. Where did all their business go? Simple, into massive cesspits dug right beneath the palace walls, right under the windows of the bedrooms and ballrooms. And these pits, of course, were constantly overflowing. Can you picture it? A noble lady in a gown worth a village's annual income, tiptoeing down a hallway, trying not to step in a puddle that had seeped up through the stone floor. The smell was described as a physical presence, like a wall you'd crash into the moment you entered the palace. A stench that soaked into the expensive fabrics, into your hair, into your very soul. So how did they solve this problem? Build aqueducts, like the ancient Romans? Nope, they just ran away. When the stench became absolutely unbearable, the entire royal court, hundreds of people, their servants, horses, tons of baggage would just pack up and move to another palace. And they'd leave the old one to air out for a few months while nature did its best to deal with this man-made branch of hell. So, all those royal progresses you read about in novels were, in reality, just panicked evacuations from their own shit. But life in a sewer like that, in this perpetual petri dish of bacteria, takes its toll. Constant sickness, skin infections, fevers, rotting teeth, that was the norm. But if you think living in that hell was scary, you can't even imagine the nightmare that began when they tried to cure themselves. Because the doctors of the time, with their mercury, lead, and red-hot irons, were far more dangerous than any disease. And how the royal dentist turned a simple toothache into a death sentence, well, we'll get into that next time. Trust me, it's gonna hurt. Yeah, trust me, it hurt. Red-hot iron in your gums, mercury fillings that slowly drove you insane. But physical pain, no matter how hellish, is just the tip of the iceberg. It's what you can see, what you can touch. But there's a fear that runs much deeper, a much stickier kind of dread. A fear that can't be cured with pliers and cauterizing irons. The fear of losing control. And if you think it was just the kings who went mad with power and paranoia, you haven't peeked into the Queen's bedchamber. That's where her own private, quiet, and far more terrifying war was being waged already. Let's do this. Her greatest enemy didn't live in a neighboring kingdom. It lived in her own body. It was smell. The smell of sweat. The smell of human nature. Official history prefers to keep quiet about this, but many aristocratic women, our queen included, were terrified of bathing. And no, not because they were just slobs. The reason is far more sinister. Picture it, you're the queen, the embodiment of divine right. Now, picture yourself, naked, defenseless, being washed by your ladies-in-waiting. In that moment, you're not a ruler. You're just a vulnerable woman of flesh and blood. Any one of them could plunge a poison comb into your side. Any one of them could see a mole in the wrong place, a scar, a sign of sickness, and the rumors would start crawling through the palace like cockroaches. Rumors that the queen isn't a goddess, that she's an ordinary, weak mortal. So what did she do? She created armor, perfume armor. Forget light, floral scents. Her perfumes were weapons, heavy, suffocating concoctions of musk, ambergris, civet, basically, animal secretions. This was a thick, oily stench that didn't mask the smell of an unwashed body. No, it annihilated it. It created an invisible wall around the queen, an aura of untouchability. When she entered a room, people didn't just bow. They instinctively held their breath. Her scent was a declaration: I am not like you. Do not approach. I do not smell human. You think this is just the whim of a spoiled woman? Think again. This was a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable, her own aging, her own biology. And this paranoia grew with every passing year. And here's a detail historians shamefully hide in the footnotes. All the mirrors gradually vanished from her chambers, every last one. First the large, full-length ones, then the small, handheld ones. She couldn't stand the sight of her own reflection, couldn't watch as time relentlessly carved wrinkles into her face, as her skin dulled, as her hair turned gray. Because her power, her very status, was inextricably linked to her image, the image of an eternally young, divine beauty. And since reality refused to bend to her will, she decided to simply cancel it. She ruthlessly controlled every portrait of herself. Artists would tremble when they got the commission. They were forbidden from painting what they saw. They had to paint propaganda. Smooth skin, perfect features, or radiant gaze. She was creating a fake image, an idealized version of herself, and forcing the entire world to believe in it. Her entire life became a performance, where she hid her real, living, aging body behind a suffocating cloud of perfume and the glossy lie of her portraits. She built a fortress of illusion around herself. But all that perfume armor, all those phony portraits, they were powerless against one primary female duty: to produce an heir. And that, you see, is a process you can't hide or glamorize. You can't possibly imagine the public, humiliating, and bloody circus that a royal birth became. when dozens of courtiers would literally stare at the queen during the most vulnerable moment of her life. And what they saw in there would have made even our dentist and his pliers shudder. We'll talk about that in the next installment. Don't touch that dial. It's gonna get messy. So remember this, behind every golden throne and silk gown, there's always a stench of paranoia and a little bit of human shit. You want to keep digging through the historical filth they hide from you in school. Then you know the drill. Subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next expose. Now, get down in the comments and tell me, whose shiny historical facade do you want me to shatter next? Which saint or hero are we missing the dirtiest truth about? Catch you in the next one.